People say, who's first to get in the morning? That would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
I see that America is starving for positive, optimistic leadership. I want to provide that alternative.
I'm someone that believes that democracy depends on heavy doses of civility.
Leaving the baggage, the drama, and the status quo of the past, and saying we've got to move forward and take on these new issues with none of that distraction.
No, I'd never done something I think I wouldn't do it.
We have no closer ally than the United Kingdom.
The lesson of the Good Friday Agreement is this: in times when things seem fragile or easily broken, that is when hope and hard work are needed the most.
Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Scott McFarland in Washington. We thank you for joining us. And we begin tonight with a CBS News exclusive, an interview with South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott, who launched his presidential exploratory committee earlier today. The move is not an official candidacy announcement, but it is a strong signal Senator Scott intends to run for the Republican nomination in 2024. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now. She sat down with the senator today in Iowa, and that's where she is with us for this show. Caitlin, tell us what you learned from this conversation, this first conversation from Senator Scott after his announcement.
Hey, Scott, great to be with you from a very windy Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where Tim Scott, as you mentioned, launched this exploratory committee for the presidency in 2024. It allows him to raise some money, to be able to travel to the early states and kind of test the waters, make his case, and likely will officially join the fray later. But what was really striking to me, Scott, is that we are 1 week removed from Donald Trump being arrested in Manhattan, which you covered very well last week. And the big question around that then was, we see the Republican Party rallying to Trump's defense. Does that necessarily translate into support for his candidacy in 2024? Well, Tim Scott is giving a clear sign that he believes there is room for others to get into this race, kind of sensing some vulnerabilities, perhaps, in Donald Trump's candidacy. Let's take a listen to a little bit more of what he told us about why he's interested in this job.
One of the lessons I've learned in my Faith in America tour is that Americans are starving for hope. They're starving for optimism and a positive approach to solving the problems that we have. As long as those solutions are anchored in conservatism, I find that they resonate really well. And so I believe that approach, a positive, optimistic approach centered in conservatism, has been very helpful. I will also say, having been born, so to speak, on the other side of the tracks, raised by a single mom who worked 16 hours a day to put food on the table and keep the lights on most of the time. The struggle of being disillusioned and being angry as a kid, not knowing that this country would afford me the opportunities that she has. Having a mentor who showed me the way and a mother who prayed me through. I think telling the whole story of America, how we're better together, believing that the future of this nation and solving problems has to be done together, I found that resonates with the American people that have been part of the Faith in America tour.
You are running in a Republican primary.
Yes.
Before you get to the general election, you have to get through a primary. Currently, the former president, Donald Trump, commands a sizable portion of the base. He is leading in all of the polls. How do you overcome that?
What I've learned on my Faith in America tour is that you focus on making sure that my solutions to the problems resonates with the American people, and that the problems that we're solving are the ones that they see as their priorities. I'm going to focus purely on the American people and why the solutions that I'm offering actually meets the needs that they have.
When you announced your exploratory committee today, the Trump campaign also released a statement. They said that voters have already rallied around President Trump, and this competition for second place is an expensive distraction. What's your response?
Really, I go back to where I'm focused. I'm not focused on politicians. I'll be honest with you. What I've heard from the American people is that they want us to focus on them, not on each other. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to continue to focus on the fact that today in too many neighborhoods, there are too many people who feel trapped or imprisoned in their homes because of the crime-ridden nature of too many neighborhoods. They want us to solve those problems. I want to focus on their solutions, not on our issues.
As you're talking about the issues, Donald Trump is going to be in court tomorrow. Is that a distraction, the legal challenges facing him? Is that a distraction from the issues that you want to be talking about?
I certainly think that District Attorney Bragg has decided that he did not want to prosecute any criminals for any reason, and he's finally figured out that his objective is to weaponize the law against his political enemies. Distracting of the American people is never helpful, but I will simply say that without any question that if you want to find a way to erode confidence in the law, weaponize it against your political opponents. So I'm going to focus my attention on solving problems, and to the extent that I can continue to offer solutions to some of the challenges that we're seeing on the border today. I mean, the fact of the matter is that one of the things that seems to be top of the mind for voters is that we have a porous, open, insecure, and unsafe border. I'm going to continue to focus my attention on how we solve that problem. I'm going to be a solution-oriented candidate that focuses, especially if I get in the race, that focuses on solving the problems that I'm hearing from the American people.
You talked today that the Trump candidacy is consumed by past grievances and drama of the future. Do you agree with that?
I think the road to socialism is paved right through a divided Republican Party. The one thing I'm going to do is to make sure that we unite the country by focusing on the priorities of the American people. I think about how crime in D.C., carjackings up 100+%, rape up 100+%. I know that a lot of people talk about politicians. Most people talk about the future of their kids. Most people are worried about making sure that they have enough money to deal with a crisis. Most Americans have around $500 to $700 in their savings account. I'm not going to spend time investing in other folks. I'm going to spend my time investing in solutions for the American people.
But clearly, by announcing your interest in running for the presidency,
yes,
you see an opening. Even though Trump has a sizable portion of the base, you see an opening in the Republican Party.
Yeah, I see that America is starving for positive, optimistic leadership. I want to provide that alternative, not to any specific candidate, but for the American people. I think, Galen, the difference between me and others, I believe, is that my focus is on the fact that I used to be a kid who didn't see a future. I used to be a kid that was angry about the cards I was dealt. I was blessed by a mother who never surrendered. I was blessed by a mentor who always loved and supported my ideal self. And it's because of those two individuals that I now have greater faith in the future for others. And I see my responsibility of sharing the good news of who we can be because we have been. If we can unite this country around the solutions, focusing more on those solutions than anything else, it's my only path forward. And it's the one I've chosen.
A couple quick policy questions.
Yes, ma'am.
You have talked a lot about your faith on the campaign trail as well. I want to ask you about your stance on whether the federal government should be involved in regulating abortion. Your colleague from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, has a bill to limit abortions at 15 weeks, federal restriction. Do you support that measure?
Yeah, so I would say this, that I am certainly 100% pro-life, without any question. I've been very, very clear about that, very consistent about that. I do think we spend not enough time understanding how far the far left has gone on the issue of abortion. The Senate Democrats have voted for late-term abortions well into the third trimester, some even suggesting that we should have abortion up until the day of birth. The fact that we are one of a handful of countries that allows for late-term abortions is a challenging predicament for us to be in.
But in order to solve that, do you think the federal government should be involved with something like what Lindsey Graham is proposing?
Yeah, there's no question that we're going to have lots of folks talk about legislation from a federal perspective, but what I've heard so far and what I've seen in the Senate aren't proposals, but votes from the left trying to figure out how to continue their campaign towards late-term abortions, even allowing abortions based on the gender of the child or the race of the child or the disabilities of the child.
But as president, if you were president, would you advocate for federal limits?
Yeah. So once again, I'm 100% pro-life, and I do believe that. No, that's not what I said. I do believe that we should have a robust conversation about what's happening on a very important topic. There's no doubt that when I'm sitting in a banking hearing, having a conversation about financial issues, and you have the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, talking about young, poor African American women having abortions to increase their labor force participation rate, I was stunned into silence. So while the underlying issue is so incredibly important, how we solve that problem is by getting everybody to the table and having that conversation.
Do you agree with the ruling from the Texas judge of suspending the FDA authorization of abortion medication?
Yeah, I think that we have to have confidence in our judiciary. I think there are contradictory positions from the district court level that's going to lead to a decision by the Supreme Court.
But do you think that federal judges should overrule decisions made by the FDA?
I do have confidence in our judiciary, and I think that this will be settled before we have an opportunity to weigh in on this issue from a legislative standpoint. So I do believe that the Supreme Court will take this issue and find a solution to it.
Quick question about
Yes,
Joe
ma'am.
Biden, because you've mentioned him a few times.
Certainly.
Do you think that he is physically and mentally up for the job?
Well, I think that he has been a poor leader for America. The question to me is it physical or mental? I think he's just not been a very good president. You look at the inflationary impact that is happening to everyday Americans today under his watch. He infused $4 trillion into our economy, starting with the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package that only missed COVID relief 1% for vaccines, 9% for COVID-related health care. That set our inflationary economy on fire. That led to, I think it's 10 increases by the Fed to cool down the economy. So his leadership has imperiled single mothers like the one that raised me, as well as senior citizens on fixed incomes. I look at this Department of Education that has made it a war against charter schools in this country that provide a real path out of poverty for so many kids. So his leadership failures, I believe, is based on his incompetence, not on his mental acuity or his physical capabilities.
And just one final question.
Yes,
if
ma'am.
Donald Trump is the nominee for the Republican Party, would you support him?
I plan on being the nominee. Obviously, I have an exploratory committee moving forward.
But if Trump is the nominee, would you support him?
Obviously, I'm looking forward to being the nominee as I'm working on my own exploratory committee.
All right, let's bring back in Caitlin. He touched on this, Caitlin, but did you get a sense of how forcefully and fiercely he's willing to challenge Trump on a debate stage or on the campaign trail?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And essentially, he is trying to make the case through this contrast in and of itself. He was very reluctant to take on the former president. When I asked him, you heard in that exchange there, he wasn't ready to commit to endorsing him, saying, I plan on being the nominee. But at the same time, he doesn't want to really take it to Trump. Instead, he's trying to draw these contrasts with Biden. And I think that's really interesting because he seems to see a lane where optimism, kind of this hopeful message, this vision for the future is, you know, his MO, essentially. And that stands in stark contrast to the former president, who we saw last week in his speech after his arraignment say that the country is going to hell. So you have this big contrast here between the two candidates. And there's a big question about whether there is an appetite within the Republican Party right now for that kind of message. Scott is certainly betting that that is the case or that there is an opportunity there. But Trump still commands such a sizable portion of the Republican Party base. So that is kind of the big question throughout this primary is, can you cut into that margin with this type of message? He seems to be the only one, you know, in the field so far kind of waging that bet. So we'll see.
And he is where he needs to be, in Iowa. So are you. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks for the report. Great job with the interview. So with Senator Scott now on the verge of joining this 2024 race, where does he fit in the field of candidates, many of whom will look to regain the presidency for the GOP? We'll get into that next. For now, you're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter.
It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're gonna tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. This launch of Senator Tim Scott's Presidential Exploratory Committee brings him one step closer to officially announcing a run for high office. But he would face heavy competition in any bid for the Republican presidential nomination. Officially, there are now 4 GOP candidates for president, with the most recent being former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. Several other big names in the GOP seem to be setting up their own campaigns, but have yet to officially enter the race. That's where we are as we begin this Wednesday night. Stead Herndon joins us now. He's national politics reporter for the New York Times and host of the Run Up podcast. Stead joining us from New York City. We thank you for doing that. What do you make of Senator Scott's announcement and what he said in that announcement today?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I'm going to thank you for having me first off. And I thought that in the interview, he laid out kind of the broad strokes of what we expect to be his message in this race. He has tried to pitch himself as someone who is more optimistic, someone who is not stuck in the grievances of Donald Trump or in the grievances that have really engulfed the Republican Party largely. He really sees himself as a more inspirational figure that can really pitch a more positive spin on the Republican base and really have them orient around the idea that if they become forward-looking, if they become focused on beating Joe Biden, then that will lead to better results rather than trying to extract revenge against Democrats or focus more broadly on cultural issues. I think that's going to be the lane he tries to run in. But I think as you can tell, it's going to be difficult when he is unwilling to really attack Donald Trump from the start. And I also heard that in this interview, given multiple times to really point out the differences and the real problems Trump has created for the GOP, even in the midterms. He has sidestepped that. So that really shows the challenge that he's up against. He wants to pitch himself as forward-looking. He wants to pitch himself as inspirational, but he doesn't want to tear down the biggest and most important figure in the Republican Party, who also happens to be his opponent.
Well, he's shown an ability, a capacity to win South Carolina statewide by big margins in Congress. Yeah. Is he even the favorite, though, in South Carolina in this theoretical primary he's joining?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to the extent that we have answers to that, as we should say, it's early, but there was a good poll that came out of South Carolina today, and it showed Donald Trump leading as expected around the 40% number. And you had Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis really next to each other around that 20% number. And then came someone like Tim Scott. I think that really shows you the mountain that he is up against, even in his own state. You know, the general idea when someone gets in with the benefit of having an early state is that they can use that as a propeller to look ahead. But it could also be a really damaging thing, too. If you don't perform well in your home state, it becomes a reason for the other states to look at you and say, well, how should we prefer you here if the home state wasn't putting you above other candidates there? So it's a dual problem. I think back to 2020 when I was reporting on the Democrats, and Elizabeth Warren finishing third in her home state ended up being the kind of final blow for that campaign. It can be a real blessing and curse to have that home state in the early mix. And for Scott, he has to show real viability in South Carolina if this campaign is going to have any hopes of really driving a national attention.
You know, speaking of those who've not gotten in the race officially yet, Ron DeSantis goes to Ohio, goes to New Hampshire in the coming days. What do you make of where he stands in all this?
Yeah, it's been interesting seeing Ron DeSantis kind of navigate the last couple months. Over since January 15th, my colleague Nate Combs recently did a piece about how his poll numbers, Ron DeSantis, have really fallen off, how Donald Trump's really coalesced support. Some of that might be people rallying around him after the indictment, but even more than that, it could be someone who are looking at the positions Ron DeSantis is taking, and it's chipping away at that early insulation that he had. I'm thinking about the position on Ukraine he took that really caused some wedges between him and Mike Pence and people like Nikki Haley. I'm thinking of the position he's taking in the South Carolina State House right now as they put together a 6-week abortion ban. These are things that, Ron DeSantis is trying to walk a very careful line in terms of growing his name recognition from the confines of the governor's house. And it's been something he has done successfully up until this point. But as Donald Trump's attacks have increased and as the Republican primary has really heated up, he has seen some fall off from that support. And so, it's not five alarm fire for Ron DeSantis right now because he hasn't announced to that point. He's still trying to drive energy and interest in donors. But at the same time, the luster on the star is a little less than it was a couple months ago. And if you're going to beat Donald Trump, that's already a problem.
National politics reporter for the New York Times, Ested Herndon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming up, more on President Biden's trip to the Emerald Isle, the latest from his meeting with the UK Prime Minister in Belfast, and an incident involving sensitive documents. That's after the break. You're streaming Red and Blue.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much. God bless you and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth The facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. President Biden is visiting his ancestral homeland of Ireland for the first time this week as president. He's embracing his family roots there and meeting with some of his Irish family members in some of the communities there. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang is also there. She joins us from Dublin. So the president meets with the British Prime Minister in Belfast. What became of that meeting, Weijia?
Scott, it's great to be with you. This was actually a relatively quick meeting. It wasn't an extended bilateral sit-down that we typically see, but the president did have tea with the prime minister, and they talked about a host of topics. No surprise that the Russian aggression in Ukraine came up, as Ireland is a fellow member of NATO. They also talked about the importance of marking the anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which is the main reason why President Biden is here today. He addressed the people of Northern Ireland and said that peace is linked to prosperity, and congratulated them for being able to grow their economy so relatively quickly since that peace accord went into place. Earlier, we did hear from a spokesperson for the White House National Security team, that is, of course, John Kirby, who often speaks about all things foreign policy. Take a listen.
The president's message today, both with Prime Minister Sunak and his opportunity to engage individually with the political party leaders, is really twofold. One, congratulations on the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And two, again, let's look for continued opportunities now for deeper investment between our two countries and between our two economies.
And Scott, of course, as you referenced earlier, this is also a very personal trip for President Biden. And earlier today, he went to County Louth, where his mother is from. And it may as well have been Brad Pitt or any other movie star in Hollywood. There were thousands of people who were giving him the celebrity treatment. It really is an honor, they say, for him to be here, especially for a president who has such deep Irish roots and someone who is so proud to talk about his Irish heritage. Scott.
What do we know about this sensitive information about the president's Ireland trip that was found somehow in Belfast?
So the U.S. Secret Service insists that this was not in any way a security risk to the U.S. Secret Service's plan and how they plan to protect President Biden, although the police in Northern Ireland confirmed that these documents were essentially found on the street and they contained the names of officers and the locations for which they were going to be patrolling. It also included a rough draft of the president's schedule, where he was going to be and roughly when. The reason this is so concerning, Scott, is because it was just a few days ago that the very same police thwarted a terrorist plot. There were people arrested for buying bomb parts to try to disrupt President Biden's visit to Northern Ireland, which is why it was so alarming. But again, Secret Service insisting that this was not a breach of security.
In Ireland, Weisha Zhang, thank you for your time.
Sure.
Be sure to tune in to CBS News Primetime tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Deputy Director of the National Economic Council, Bharat Ramamurthy, will join us to discuss the latest inflation numbers and the state of the U.S. economy. That does it for us today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money?
If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.